Well, welcome to the Sean Trey Show. I've got a really interesting guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm James Stephenson. I'm becoming known as the Stepdad or Internet Stepdad, I guess. I've done a number of things for career over my life, but in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working to help young men, particularly, but those growing up without a dad. My parents were divorced when I grew up, so grew up without a dad, and I know there's challenges, and there's actually a lot more challenges today, and so just trying to give a little encouragement and guidance, answer questions, and love to those that are growing up without a dad. I grew up without a dad. My parents divorced when I was two. Actually, dad wasn't there the whole time I was, even when I was born. And so, as a young man growing up without a dad, you have a lot of self doubts, a lot of questions, and there's a lot more young men growing up without a dad today. So, I started a YouTube channel about 3.5 years ago to make videos for young men growing up without a dad, and lately it's blown up actually on Instagram more than it's after 4 years on or 3.5 years on YouTube and barely getting to that 4,000 hours of watch time and 1,000 subscribers. I had one video go viral, and I think I was fishing in the wrong pond. But just making videos, answering questions, trying to provide encouragement and love and hope for everyone growing up without a dad, but particularly for young men.
What was it? What was the thing that you saw that made you go, "Hey, I need to start this YouTube channel"?
Sean, I wish I could point to one thing that did that. I don't know that there's one thing. There's a lot of gradually over time we've done a lot, which is good to help young ladies,
Mhm.
encouraging more STEM activity for girls. My degree's in engineering. I sat in classes full of mostly young men and a few young ladies, and that's fine too. And it's good, but I'd see things at work where they'd have activities for girls, and I'd think, I can't take my boys to that. And my kids were raised with a dad. With They may not think that was that great, but I'm thinking of, if I had grown up like that when I was questioning my own abilities without a dad in my life, how am I going to know how to be a good man when my dad's not there? How am I going to learn to be a good husband when I didn't have a dad in my home to show me the right way to do that? And in fact, if anything, it was more causing doubts. My dad ended up having four wives by the time he was done, not all at once, sequentially,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so here I am hoping to have a good family life as I'm growing up, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. There's a lot of self doubts that come because of that lacking positive male role model, and particularly in my own home. I had friends that were growing. I spent a lot of time in friends' houses and saw their dads and how they interacted with them and
Yeah.
and their moms and so forth. So fast forward to today. Now there's a lot more kids growing up without a dad in the home, and and for the young men, there's also societal messages that weren't there when I was there that almost leave you wondering whether it's even good to be a man. We put toxic next to the word masculinity and throw that around. And for a young man who's already got self doubts because he doesn't know if he's going to know how to be a good dad, a good adult man, um, just by virtue of the fact that his dad's not there to show him how to do it. And then you put on top of that some dubious messages in society today that didn't exist then. My hope is just that they can learn and see that it's okay. It's okay to be a man. It's okay to be
Yeah.
a young man growing up. Even if your dad's not there, you can still learn how to be a good man. You can learn to be a good husband if you want to. You can learn to be a good dad if you want to. And so that's I don't know that there was one pivotal moment to a long-winded answer to your question, Sean. It's just over time.
I love long-winded.
Well, well, it was in 2015. I reserved the domain name mystepdad.org. I didn't do anything with it for probably 3 or 4 years, um, and then I finally started the YouTube channel. There's all kinds of reasons not to do this. For me, a lot of it was economic. I'm actually organized as a 501c3. It's a nonprofit, and I've been
Okay.
funding this myself. So initially, it was like a side gig, or let me see what I can do on the side, and just continued
Yeah.
feeling like it needs to be my main focus, which it is now.
Mhm.
But we're still
That's awesome.
economically, we're a little precarious, but we're doing it anyway. We're making do. So,
One of the things that impressed me when I was looking through your content, through your YouTube channel, and I found you through Instagram.
uh huh,
When I was young, I grew up with a dad, and my dad was awesome, and yet
hmm,
he still didn't have all the information to give me, and I don't
hmm,
know if he had it. You know what I mean? And there were moments like I remember when we were having the talk,
hmm,
and he left me. It was abbreviated, and then he left a book. And he's like, "Well, look in this book. This is a good." It was like a puberty book, and I was just like, looked at the book, and my best friend Mike pulled me aside, and he's like, "All right, I'm going to tell you what I learned from other male figures that were older than him and his dad,
uh-huh,
and
uh-huh,
his was still abbreviated. It wasn't great, and it was just like there was this lack of information, and I was like, for me, I've always thought, what if there was a book that told us what we needed to know in life? And this is an interesting thing because it's not just with masculinity and being a
hmm,
guy and how to be a guy. There's a lot of areas that this information is lacking. How to be fiscally responsible, how to take care of your health. And it's interesting now that we're meeting these people that are going, you know what, there have been some areas that information is lacking. We have in school, we learn all of this stuff that is great and interesting, yet often is not all applicable to the lives that we need to live or that society asks us to live.
hmm,
And people are left wanting of information. And I think that there's this beautiful space now that, I mean, like, I love YouTube. YouTube gives me the ability, years ago, if I was, like when I edit video and there's a feature that I
hmm.
don't understand,
Go to
I go on
YouTube.
YouTube
Yeah.
and go, how to do this, go how to do this. And it's like, boom, done. There it is. It's like, wow, it's so simple. Versus, years ago, if you wanted to figure out how to do something, you had to apprentice, you had to go to a full educational program. And there weren't programs
Yeah.
for how to be a guy. You know what I mean? There weren't programs for that. How to, and some of these things, I for myself, some of these things are a point in pride. I know how to change a tire, and I know how to do it the right way, and that was something my dad taught me. And yet, I see people. I saw a guy changing a tire today on the side of the road, and he was doing it wrong. The jack, first of all, was in the wrong spot. He was not, the car. I was not,
Level.
in.
Chalked.
He
Yeah.
yeah, all of that stuff. The brake wasn't
Yeah.
engaged. He didn't have, and I was just like, oh man, and not judging him. No one
Hmm.
taught him. There wasn't the information passed along. And so when I found your channel, I was like, I was binge watching some things like I never knew that. I never knew that. Wow. That's awesome information. Now, do you get a lot of people commenting or messaging or reaching out, um, A, thanking you, or B, asking for you to do videos about other things?
Yeah. Both of those, and and that's really heartwarming and fulfilling. After 3 years of feeling like I'm barely making any kind of a splash, a ripple, even a drop in the bucket, and now there's a lot since it has taken off in Instagram, um, and that's had a little bit of a spillover effect into the YouTube too. Not as much as I would have anticipated, and that's fine if that's where the audience is. If that's where the people I can serve is, that's great. And I've had so many,
Right.
Sean, people that have done both of the things you said. I get a lot of direct messages just thanking me, which I appreciate, and yeah, a lot of questions. It's I'm getting questions I don't know the answers to. How do you use a multimeter? Well, I've got one, and I know how to make sure I got 110 coming out of my plugs, but that's about it. Um, and the good news about it is there's really a community being developed because it almost makes me a little more careful about what I record because if I miss a step, then someone will point it out, which is fantastic. I love that fact that, hey, I'm a
Yeah.
professional, I'm an electrician. Here's X, Y, and Z. So in fact, I filmed one yesterday. Uh, yeah, I think I posted it yesterday. In fact, I put it in the comments. Make sure you read the comments on here because people that know more about this will, or that will catch things I missed, will put it in the comments, and you can learn from that too. So it's really turning into a large community of people that are wanting to add value and help those that have questions. Um, you
That's
know,
awesome.
I, I want to jump in a little bit though, Sean. The how-to stuff is that's the surface issue for someone that's growing up
Okay.
without their dad, and it's stuff that they typically would have learned from a dad. And there's a lot of single moms, and I just honor and take my hat off to single moms. I watched what my mom did raising 5 kids by herself, and it was hell would not be an inept description. It was hard for her to raise 5 kids. I mean, I was born. My oldest brother was probably 8 years old when my parents split up, and mom raised us from then till adulthood by herself. And 4 teenage boys, a lot of challenges. So you single moms out there that pick this up, just know that I have a ton of respect and love for you, and I know what you're going through is tough. My wife and I raised 5 kids together, not by ourselves, together. And there were days I thought, "Holy cow, how can two of us do this?" Let alone one. Um, I, so the how-to questions are the surface issues, Sean. So that's where it's like I don't know how to do this. If I could ask my dad, then I'd know how to do that. But the real thing that is missing, and the real part that needs healing and fixing is underlying that. It's why did my dad leave me? What? And as a kid, when you're asking yourself that question, you got to look at it from the perspective of adults don't make mistakes. When you're 4 years old,
Right.
adults are like gods. They know everything. They don't make mistakes. So if my dad's not there, then what did I do that's wrong that he would leave me? And that gets imprinted into you when you're little. You start growing up and you learn intellectually that, okay, no, I get it. My parents had marital problems, they split up, and dad didn't leave me, but that emotion's still deep inside, and that's until that heals, you're going through life hurting. And the good news is you can
Yeah.
heal from that, but that's really that love, that affection, that relationship with a dad is the part that is really, I think, what resonates with people. I do a video on, I can't
Yeah.
remember what it was. It was how to make a holiday drink. And one comment on there is the little emoji with tears coming out. And I'm thinking, I messaged her. I said, did I say something that, made you sad? And she replied, no, no, it says, these are tears of joy, and I'm thinking for me making a holiday drink with apple juice and cinnamon sticks. And that, I think that just exemplifies that there's a lot of people in the world that are hurting because they didn't have that loving relationship with a dad. So as much as I can
Yeah.
vicariously or virtually provide that to others, boy, I love that. Because because I had that in my life too. There's more to the story, but I'm talking too long, so I'm going to take a breath.
No, no, not talking too long. It's interesting that you point out some things there, though. Um, we 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 so often in life will see a problem, we'll see something that looks like it's the
Yeah,
problem, but the reality is that one of the best examples that I have of late is another type of video that I binge watch on both YouTube and Instagram and at Facebook. They have these too. You ever see these videos where the it's they trim hooves of cattle and horses, but the cattle ones are the really interesting one. Go online. It's a thing.
yeah,
It's a thing. Cattle hoof trimming. There's this guy in Scotland, I think it is. It's called the Hoof GP. He's got these amazing videos. But one of the things that I found, I learned through YouTube and Facebook videos about cattle's hooves is that when a cow is lame and it's limping, they'll go and inspect the hoof and they'll find something on the surface that shows them that there
hmm,
is a problem. And it might be just a small mark, but the trained eye goes, okay, there is something much larger
hmm,
underneath this that has caused an imbalance in this hoof that is causing pain. And that pain causes the cow not to be able to walk, not be
hmm,
able to function. And when they clean it out, and one of the things that's really interesting is that you can't just leave it. You have to clean it out. And to clean it out, you have to cut away the hoof that is on
hmm,
top of this problem. Sometimes it's an abscess that's formed underneath. Sometimes there's some inflammation. And when they cut it away, they treat it. And I think that's really important, like what you pointed out. Like you can treat with the how tos. You know, you're giving people information, but yet there is still this underlying thing that is beginning to be addressed. And I think that maybe sometimes people don't know when we're talking about, you know, not cow's hooves, but people's
hmm,
emotions and people's um, experiences. We tend to not like things uncovered. We tend to those things, you know,
hmm,
feel scary. If I start looking at my fears, if I start looking at places that I am feeling insufficient or wounded, you know, people start covering up a little bit. But yet, I think what you're doing, part of it, is creating a safe space for people to even
hmm,
look at that and start to identify that there might be something else going on for them.
hmm.
You know?
Well, and you're right. I, I, I don't know why. When I started making videos, at the end of them, I, there's two messages I would put at the end of just about every video. Sometimes I forget, but you know, and I'm directing it primarily to young men, and not because I don't love young women. And particularly fatherless young women. The last thing I want to do is make them feel like I don't care about them, because I do, and I get questions, and I'll answer those questions too. I talk to the young men because I grew up as a young man. I can relate firsthand, and I also believe that there are unique challenges for the young men that don't have dads, um, that
Yeah.
are not getting addressed. So I talk to them, but I end every video with two things: is you can still succeed even though your dad may not be in your daily life. So, and I mean that, you know, give that hope that, you know what, even though it, it's probably not even a conscious question that they've got in their mind, but it's there. Is how am I going to be an adult man, or what kind of an adult man am I going to be when I don't have a dad to show me how? Well, you can figure it out. Um, it'll take more work, it'll take more effort, it'll take more conviction or commitment on your part, but you can do it. And the other one is that you've got a dad that loves you, and I think that's the part that gets the crying emojis, because that's the one that, you know, you've cut back the hoof, now you're into the abscess and you're treating the abscess. It's like,
Yeah.
holy cow, there is, I do have a dad that loves me. That hope or that feeling, um, you're into that abscess that you described in people's souls, in the heart of what the issue is. So whether you know how to change a tire or, uh, my biggest video on YouTube is how to shave a cat, just because it was something I was doing and with my daughter, and we filmed it and shaved a cat, and whatever the proximate problem is, whatever the I don't know how to do this, is there someone that can show me how problem? Um, Once you get past that, that's the surface issue. That's not the root issue. So, my guess is that that's why it gets the response that it does, and that I generally address the young men too, and that stirs the pot in some ways that are, not it's not my desire, but it does. A lot of people are sensitive to the fact that, as soon as you do something for young men, well, do you not like young women? What do you got against women? And some of those comments come up too. I try not to see those, or and not that I'm trying to be blind to it, but they detract. Um,
We get it for the content that I create for myself and my wife. It just comments. I tend to look at it this way: you're doing a good thing. You can't make
yeah,
everyone
yeah,
happy, and you
yeah,
shouldn't try. You just go out and go. You know what? I wish you well.
yeah,
I wish you well. I got something that's important for me to do. We have so much time on this planet. Each of us has a
yeah,
finite amount of time, and I try to tell myself, like, don't have time for that. You know, and it's not everyone's experience is different. And the thing is too, like, that's an interesting thing. You're not making videos for young women, but like at the same time, like, anyone can look at your
yeah,
videos. Anyone can check these out. You know what I mean? It's an
yeah.
information for
No, and
all. You
ninety
know?
percent of it doesn't matter whether you're a young man or young lady. I mean, most of cooking, fixing things, changing a garage door opener, whatever. It doesn't matter. it,
Yeah.
it,
But I want to also then respect what you were saying, though, that your calling is to really to create a space where some of these young men can look at the wounding that they have,
yeah.
not having a father there. So that's really special.
Well, I get replies from men
Now,
that are
um, go
sorry.
ahead.
I mean, I'm getting responses from men that are in their 30s and
Yep.
40s that, because they still have that abscess under the surface. Yeah, they've learned how to survive in life, and maybe they don't know all the things they wish they would have, but under the surface, it's still that, why did dad leave me, or why I sure wish I could have had that relationship with my dad. Um, and so, I mean, hopefully it's helping. And it's because that's the process I went through. I didn't. I had those same questions, had those same hurt feelings, those same self doubts, and through a lot of work, managed to reconcile that and get to a point where I can honestly say I love my dad. I'm grateful for my dad. He passed away in 2005, so he hasn't been here for quite a while, but. And he wasn't abusive. There's a lot of situations. You can even have a present father that's physically present but emotionally absent. So yeah, my dad's here, but he's
Yeah.
he's really not. You can have abusive
Yeah.
fathers, which gratefully I didn't have any of that. I had an absentee father. I saw him a couple times a year, and spent a week in the summer at his house, and had good experiences with him. Um, but he wasn't there most of the time. He's just not there. So
One of the things that pops into mind is that, coming back to the information, the idea of this. Um, how did you sit down and think about, like, what are the things that a father, how did you start finding your content? How did you start putting together these lists of, what are some things that we should be teaching young men? Did you take an overall view and try to outline everything beforehand, or did you just start thinking about things that came to your own mind, that you wish you had have learned?
yeah, Initially, no. Initially, it was really more to be kind of a virtual surrogate dad. So if we were doing something around the house, this would be a good lesson to show. I grabbed a camera and I'd record it. So it was as much to be a virtual presence for young men or whoever growing up without a dad. Um, and like shaving the cat. I mean, I wouldn't think, oh, that's something I needed to know how to do when I was growing up, is shave a cat. No, I didn't. Um, but we were doing it, so let's grab the cameras and we'll film it and show people how to do it. So it was really more to just allow them into our lives, into our home, into my life, so that they could have a taste of what it might be like to be with a dad. But as it progressed, I did get on my whiteboard here in the office and think, okay, so what are the lessons and what are the things? And I drew out what I call the map to manhood. And I've actually got a book manuscript
Oh,
that I say 90%. It's been 90% for a while. So I guess that last 10% always, it turns out to be more. But I've talked to a publisher. I've got cover design, so I call it the Map to Manhood, a guide for young men growing up without a dad. And I did map out lessons and paths, and I've got 4 of them on this map to manhood. And the first one is love. It's the path of love, learning to love ultimately, because the biggest abscess or the biggest negative impact of not having a dad in your life is that self-doubt and that lack of ability to love yourself. So ultimately, the end of that path is to help a person learn to love themselves. And I start with
that's so
pets.
true.
You got a dog there you're talking to, right? So we got pets. It's easy to learn to love a pet. So start with a pet, have a pet, learn to love a
Yeah,
pet, go to friends. Okay. And I got stories about when I was growing up and some of the friends I had and some of the things we did together. And learn to love your friends, learn to love your family. Sometimes that's harder, particularly if you got siblings, because we tend to argue more than we tend to say I love you. And we never said I love you growing up in my family. um, but learn how to do that, and then ultimately to learn to love yourself. And there's other things, the self-discipline. We are growing up, or kids today or people today grow up in a world of entitlement. It's like I deserve this because I exist. Well, guess what? You got to work for it. And so the self-discipline part is
yeah,
also one of the tracks. Learning, you talked about exercise or health, learning to take care of ourselves. And so I've got those on on the self-discipline track, and there's one on relationships. We're also in a virtual world, so you don't go to someone's house anymore, you text them. um, well,
yeah.
let's learn how to have in-person relationships again, friendships and relationships, dating the opposite
Right?
sex, and social skills, and getting confident introducing yourself, and things like that. So that's one of the tracks that I think is key. And the last one is finding and living your purpose. So what is your purpose in life? Everyone's got unique abilities, experiences. How can you bring those to bear to a purpose that is higher than yourself, and figuring out what that is and then working on that, and enjoying that experience? So that's the
Yes.
last track on that one, is living your purpose, finding what your purpose is and living it. So that's but that was like 2 or 3 years into it. That was probably in the last year that I put that together and got a graphic designer to map it out, and wrote the manuscript. I was almost ready to take it to publishing, and I realized that my audience is a little older than I had anticipated. I was really gearing this for older teenagers, 15, 16 to 19. And I'm getting responses from them too. And that's fantastic, because the sooner you can fix that abscess, the better, the longer life you have of productivity
Yeah.
and contribution and ability to help others. Uh, but there's nothing wrong with fixing that when you're 50, which is how I was
Right.
on that abscess and that emotion challenge.
See, that's an interesting thing. That's something that I love that you're talking about. Like this, there's still time to fix it. I grew up with a dad who was very caring. But to a degree, he was working hard. There were three of us. Finances
Mhm.
worked great, and he spent a lot of time working. And emotionally, um, he didn't always know how to be there. And he was out doing sports and coaching teams and coaching sports teams, and he was very accessible to them. And it was tricky at times. And he did the best he could with us. But one of the things that my parents, neither of them had great information on, was financial
Mhm.
information. And, so I grew up, and my dad always was a kind person and taught us a lot about, his views on life and spirituality. But neither of my parents was great
Mhm.
with money. And money was a challenge for them. And I didn't realize that, and I felt like I got their good nature, their positivity, and I got a lot of the good things from my parents, their work ethic. But when I started growing up and getting out into the world and having my own family, I was suddenly struck by the realization I knew nothing about money. I knew nothing about how to care for my own finances or to grow money or to be fiscally
Mhm.
responsible. And because I was doing what was modeled for me. And so, it was overwhelming. And I'm watching my friends that are, investing, buying their second houses. And I'm just like, man, good for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Not hating on that, not letting that, but wow, I'm not there. And I can't be angry at my father because I don't think he had the information,
Mhm.
and I can't be angry for at people for not giving that to me. And I just started going, well, I'm going to seek this information out. I'm going
Mhm.
to seek it out. And, I started looking, I started digesting. And what I found as well is in a similar capacity to what's happening here is that there is a community of people that were also
Mhm.
like this,
Oh yeah.
also like me, that were going, I never had this information and I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And what was so special though is that what I found is that a lot of people were saying that same thing. It's never
Mhm.
too late. It's never too late to make these changes because a lot of us feel like, oh man, I watched this one guy and he was doing all these financial tips and he's like, well, you know what? If you do this, you're going to be a millionaire by the time you're 29. I'm like, well, I'm way older than that.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that I'm just sitting there going, dude, I hope that the ship hasn't sailed for me to get my stuff together, for me to grow my own business, for me to grow my own
Mhm.
things, and to grow
Mhm.
my platform, as I want to bring in through my podcast together people that are inspirational, and so that we can share this and start creating a network to grow each other's content and to grow each other's
Mhm.
message. And all the time I'm sitting there going, I hope it's not too late. I hope it's not too late. I hope it's not too late. And so what you're sharing as well is, that doubt falls into the back of
Mhm.
people's minds, and it's such a beautiful message to hear, you know what? You can still be a good man, even if you're just starting this out at 50,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
It was a seminar that I went to, and I've struggled with these feelings for a long time. It was back in 2005, and I say these feelings of that. Why? How could Dad leave me? 2005, my
Yeah.
sister-in-law is speaking at my dad's funeral, and she's talking about my older brother, her husband, and his experience. And he was closest physically, geographically. He actually moved to where my dad lived and worked with my dad for a while after he got out of high school and spent a lot of time with Dad. And she made the comment, and she was speaking at the funeral, that she about my brother Scott, that ultimately he could forgive him. And I'm sitting in the audience, and wow, that just resonated with me. So I went up to her after. I said, what do you you said he could forgive him? What about what?" And she said, "For not being there." And because I hadn't talked to even my siblings about it. So this is 2005. I'm 58 now, whatever that is, 40-ish, I guess. And and that's still in me, is how do I deal with that? So Dad's passed away now, and I had a lot of good experiences with him, but it wasn't. I go to a seminar and I'm talking about what I'm doing for young men growing up without a dad, starting the YouTube channel, trying to help them. Um, and and the person leading the workshop, points out that you haven't healed from this yet, and here's what you need to do, and gave me some specific actions to take. And I got to admit, I resisted them because it's opening up that abscess and going in there and cleaning it out. And emotionally, it hurts, but you can't heal by avoiding it. You can't
Yeah.
logic your way through the healing process when it comes to an absentee parent. You have to go through the emotions.
Yeah.
That's the healing path. And so to your point, Sean, I think we do avoid it. I don't want to go there because it hurts, but that's how you get through the
Yeah.
hurt, is going through the hurt. Um, and you can then you're not that 6-year old, 5-year old kid that got hurt because your dad's not there anymore. Now you truly are that 40, 50, 55-year old man or woman that now you put the emotions aside because you've healed from that and you had the logic onto it. And I can objectively look at dad and say, yeah, he did make some bad mistakes and they had some negative impact on our family. Um, but I still love him anyway. And I'm glad I had the experiences that
Yeah.
I did with him. And not only that, I'm glad that he wasn't there, not because I like that, but now I've got some unique thing in my life that I can connect with people that grew up without a dad and hopefully help them learn not only how to adult, but how to heal from that absentee father that wasn't there. And I wouldn't be able to do that if, my kids, I think they often scratch their heads about what I'm doing, but they can't relate to what I've gone through because their dad was there. Now, I'm not a perfect dad by any means, and they'll tell you that. Uh, but uh,
Yeah.
but but they didn't grow up without their dad. I did, and so all of you that grow up without your dads, I can relate to that, at least in aspect. Again, I didn't have an abusive dad. I didn't have a psychotic dad or anything like that. But he just wasn't there. So what are
Yeah.
your unique experiences in life, and how can they turn to something you can do to serve others and help them? And everyone has them. Everyone has them. So get through the
Yes.
healing process so that you can serve others. That's I guess one of the messages. You can still succeed even though your dad's not in your daily life. That's another way to say it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that part of the um, making sense, and I think this is I remember there was a book that I read, my mom gave me ages ago, called The Wounded Healer.
Mhm,
And The Wounded Healer, it was a really interesting concept for me because essentially it said that to heal, you have to see and take a deep look at the wounding that you have. And then as you heal others, it heals
mhm,
yourself. And I think that's a powerful thing, is like we all have trauma. We all have experiences. Now, how do we take what we are good at and what we've found as our calling in life and create a space of service of sorts where we share that with people, or we find a way to deliver that to others? And some people, it might be their voice. Maybe they can
mhm,
sing. Maybe they are a beautiful
mhm,
musician, and their music tells a story that other people need to hear. Maybe their calling is just to be kind, and they are a kind person, and that is, they have just a regular day job, but their kindness is their
mhm,
purpose. They go about a 9 to 5, but they do it in a way that brings joy to other people's lives. That's powerful. It doesn't have to be something so esoteric. At times it can be just something
mhm,
very generic. You work as a cashier at a supermarket, and instead of being grumpy,
mhm,
you smile. You tell people, I hope you have a great day. That could be someone's calling. It is simply as simple as figuring out what it means for you to be a part of making this world a little bit better
mhm,
of a place. That's at
mhm,
least me what I
mhm.
think it is.
Yeah, you say that. I immediately think of one of my former bosses. who was an astronaut. He's a Hall of Fame astronaut, and he was the
That's
vice
awesome.
president. I worked in aerospace and defense for a little while, for 12 years, and he typified that. He was so outgoing, so easy to talk to for most people. In fact, I left there in part to do this, and he was kind of, I called him up, hey, Kent, can we go flying? He's a pilot, go flying and do a video on that. And so, yeah, let's go, we'll do it. And that was one of the earlier videos I did. But that kind of person you're describing, just kind, uh, when you would think, man, if I was an astronaut, I'd be cocky, or a Navy fighter pilot. And
Right.
this guy is so kind and willing to share and give. That's who I thought of when you were describing a person like that.
That's awesome. I'm on a side note. I'm a huge fan of space. I wanted
Oh,
to be an
yeah,
astronaut
yeah.
as a kid, and I went to space camp down in
Oh, did you?
Huntsville
Yeah.
when I was a teenager.
I
I
used
mean,
to. My
of
office
course,
was right
loved it.
next to another astronaut for a while, former astronaut, because they were. I worked for a company that made rocket motors, and
That's awesome.
it was good people, neat people generally.
Really
But
interesting. Really interesting.
if you talk about
The,
that kindness, there's a
Go
big
ahead.
part of my story that I haven't shared, and that's a large reason of why I'm doing what I'm doing. When I was 12, 13, there was a guy in my neighborhood that came into my life, and he's kind of like this that you're talking about. He was a blue collar guy with a family, a little bit older than ours, so his kids were grown, but he was a leader in our scout group, and but beyond that, I could go to his house and hang out, and he became that surrogate dad for me, because he's the guy. We didn't have YouTube back then; the internet wasn't even a concept, as far as I know, and but I could go to his house and hang out, and he came over when our car needed new brakes, drum brakes in the front. Um, and he showed me how to change the brakes. He would take me camping with him and his family, and I could. So he became my stepdad, or my surrogate dad, when I was growing up, and not with any fanfare, not because he wanted to start a YouTube channel or be famous for it, just because he cared about me, and that's the part that resonated most with me. Is I mean, I knew, because he'd chew me out if I did something that he thought was stupid. He'd chew me out about it. And yet he was concerned for my feelings, and he became that positive male role model, that stepdad or surrogate dad for me. His name was Mark Gould, and he died in 2012. But from the time I was 12 till even after I was married, my wife and I went camping with him and his wife and some other couples after I got married. So he was there for me in that time frame, and a lot of what I'm doing is really to pay him back, pay forward his kindness and his love to me that was critical at a time when I was growing up. So I think there's a lot of good people out in the world. We don't see them in the news. You don't see them on social media. They're not doing fancy backflips off buildings or whatever else catches your attention span for the 3.6 seconds that most of us have anymore. But there's good people out there, and so we look for them. And I love what you're doing on your podcast, because that's what you're spreading positivity around the world. So good for you for doing your part of that as well, Sean.
Trying, man. We got to try. I think things changed for me when my daughter was
Mm.
born. I'm not going to lie. Before she was born, I'm not a bad person, but I have become better. I have become
Mm-hmm.
better as a conscious choice. Because when I looked down and I saw that little person, and that little person depended upon me so much. And, you know, and when my wife is a professional entertainer, and she made more money than I did. So I took a back burner, started
Mm-hmm.
doing work from home, and became kind of the primary caregiver for our
Mm-hmm.
daughter for a
Mm-hmm.
long period of time. And you know, the amount of questions my daughter asked me, the amount of expectations that she needed me to meet, I sat there and there was a very conscious choice where I said, wow, you know, this is harder than I thought, but I'm up for it and I want to be better. And not just that, I want to help make our world better because I had this little person that was looking up to me to be better, to be better. And I had to force myself to go, you know what? And one of the things too that popped up that I immediately became aware of was a realization that I was older than my parents were when they had me. And I thought they had it all together. And I far from have it all together. And I just sat there and go, oh my gosh, And I made a conscious decision to try to be at the best I could, and to not fall prey to the negativity that surrounds us
Mm-hmm.
so often that we see all over the place, and just sit there and go, you know what? I'm going to do the best job I can with this kid and see where we go from there. Hopefully it's good. But, yet at the same time, if I want to help my daughter, I was like, I need to spread a message as far and wide as I can about how to be inspired, to be a nice, positive person. The people that something you said earlier on popped into mind and made me just think of someone. Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, such a great guy, But one of the things too that you said is when you were talking about, well, they have a father that loves them. And I thought Fred Rogers popped into mind that, he would have these kids that would come onto his show or just people that watched. And he would always, talk out into the TV and say, you are important, you matter, you are loved, there are people who care for you. And it just popped into my head that for some children, that might have been the only person who ever said that to them, the only person who paid attention to them. It was interesting that there was one time that I was reading Fred Rogers was doing an interview on a TV show. And he told them, don't have any children come to set. And they're like, why? And he says, if there are children here, I will not pay attention to the interview. Because he's like, if there are children here, I will focus on the children because that's who I am. And he's like, and I can't ignore the kids to have a conversation with a bunch of adults because those kids need those kids. It's much more important for them to have me pay attention to them. And I think they still brought some kids to one of the interviews. And Fred Rogers did what he said he was going to do. He just walked over and sat down and started talking to the kids and completely ignored everyone else because that was his mission. His mission was to give children his attention, to give them his validation, and to give them his time where he heard them and saw them. And I think that is such an important thing, to just be present. Because I think part of what you're talking about are these fathers that weren't present and the wounding that happened from that.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people have said, "Hey, this is like Fred Rogers again," and
Which is
yeah, well, it's funny. I do that. The man did great work, as I understand it. When I was a kid and I would see his show, I got to admit, I thought it was a little weird. I didn't care for the Mister Rogers Neighborhood show. I thought it was kind of strange.
The puppets
Yeah,
were
the
weird,
puppets. The
man.
puppets
No
were like
doubt.
freaky. I was like, "Whoa, this is weird." I didn't, so I didn't care for it. But understanding now the work he was doing with the kids, I mean, that's fantastic too. Um, I don't, knowing my own reaction when I was watching it as a kid. It's like I don't know if that's the one. I don't know if I like being branded as Mister Rogers, but but
Well, we need to update it. Another one that I think is more modern and culturally relevant, and this is another person that is just in the mass consciousness as a very caring and charismatic figure. What's his name? LeVar Burton.
yeah,
play
Yeah,
Geordie
yeah,
La
yes.
Forge.
Yeah,
Reading Rainbow. There is a whole generation of people that grew up with reading Rainbow and had this guy telling them to
yeah,
read, and it was just like, wow, so similar type of a person who saw, listened, and
yeah.
cared.
I can get used to him without a visor on, though. If he doesn't have his visor on, it's like,
Right,
wait a minute, that's
right.
not him. LeVar, where's your visor?
That's not Geordie. Where's
Yeah,
Geordie La Forge?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm a huge Trekkie, so
yeah,
I understand
yeah. I
that
love
totally.
Star Trek. TNG. It's got to be TNG, but yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
TNG was great.
yeah.
I never got into Deep Space
No,
Nine.
I tried that one a
Never got
little
into
bit.
it.
The opening episode was really good. The main actor, but I still remember one scene in there. I thought, man, that dude is a great actor. But I didn't get into the
Right?
Deep Space Nine as much.
Yeah.
But
Didn't couldn't I couldn't hang with Deep Space Nine. Let me ask you this: if you could go back in time and give some advice to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
that's a great question. In fact, it's interesting you bring that up, Sean, because I talk about healing from that abscess of that hurt. That's one of the steps that you can do that is really can be powerful. Is write a letter to your younger self. So the answer to that um, is understand that it's not your fault that dad's not there. It's really not.
Yeah,
And you've got to understand that emotionally. You can't just understand that intellectually. And that you can still successfully, that's what I say on every video now, but you can learn how to be a good dad. You can still be a good adult man. Even today, in our world today, there's room for that. In fact, it's needed tremendously. And and you can do it. I mean, that's the advice I would give my younger self, and that's the very advice that the message that I'm trying to share with everyone that'll listen or sees videos or messages from Stepdad.